Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to The Script, the series about how to improve everything and everyone around your post, production, broadcast, AV, and live event infrastructure, workflow, and career. I'm Jeff Sangpeel, the Post Doctor. Today, we're talking about post-production tools and how they evolve and how they need to evolve in a marketplace that is as diverse as it is integrated. Karl Soule has an extensive background in the creative tools that are used to take everything after the word cut all the way up to delivery. He's a business development and workflow specialist with Adobe, and in his time there, he's been on the forefront of evangelizing Premiere as a primary editorial tool and also the expanding Adobe product ecosystem. But when you take a look in detail, you find that one of Karl's specialties is being an editor with enough color chops to be dangerous. Man after my own heart. And I think that speaks to why he's been so dang busy of late, leading up to NAB and at the show. Karl, it's great to have you on The Script. Really glad you were able to make the time with all the post-NAB crazy and excitement from all the changes in Creative Cloud.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. I know we've talked about this for a while, and I'm super happy to make time for you today.
Excellent. So let's take it from the top. Just before the turn of the century, because I always love a good origin story. You began your work in the tech industry managing an assembly line at Apple, producing some of the computers that many in this business got their start with. I know I personally have left blood inside of 8100s and 9500s. They were sharp. How did you
Yes.
get started with Apple, and what did you take away from those years working with them?
Well, it was funny. I grew up, very interested in radio, and I actually got my start working in radio in the very early '90s. I envisioned myself as some sort of a DJ, traveling around and being able to work from radio station to radio station. And then I got married and I had kids, and at an early age, decided radio was going through a huge change, a huge revolution. The duopoly laws were changing, and suddenly, every radio station was getting bought up. When I started in the business, there was like 300 different companies running radio stations across North America. And I think by the end of that decade, there were like four. It was kind of a crazy consolidation. And so I was looking for like the next thing after radio, after spending about 5, 6 years working at various radio stations, doing audio production, tech direction, even producing. From the Los Angeles area, a gentleman named Ted Green was somebody that I worked really closely, and I was his one of his producers for his talk show up in the Sacramento market. But moving to Apple was kind of by happenstance. It was a matter of answering an ad for a tech assembly job, basically building computers. And I was already at a point in my life where I had put together several PCs, and I thought, hey, I can probably do this. And I quickly moved into what was called failure analysis. The machines that didn't pass the initial inspection, figuring out like, was the RAM loose or was there some other type of problem with the motherboard? I worked for Apple for about 5 years. Mostly working on 8500 and 9500 Macs. I identified a product, a little defect in the 8500s actually that got me a little commendation at Apple. So it was a brand new board design, and they were having some issues with it. Um, it was interesting, kind of getting involved in the high tech and actually starting to understand like the Silicon Valley culture. Because even though we were based more in Central California, in a little place called Elk Grove, California, definitely Apple brings their culture with them no matter where they are in the world. And so it was an opportunity to attend classes through something called Apple University. I learned about process auditing and understanding documentation practices through Apple. And then from there, I left and went to a startup company that was coming from a lot of the folks from New Tech and from the Amiga world. It was a company called Play Incorporated. And I spent the better part of 6, 7 years at Play.
I mean, after your time there at Apple and then Play, you dove into the rapids of being creatives. So you spent some time as a producer director.
Yeah.
So tell me about that evolution and what you still use in talking with content creators and filmmakers today that you took away from that.
Well, first, I think the biggest thing I took away from it was there's never enough time. um, I did find a lot of different niches that I worked in. I did graphics and motion graphic design for some local award shows in Northern California. I did live technical direction and what the Europeans would call vision mixing, switcher operator basically, working with image magnification setups for various like concerts and award shows, and then editing together different pieces for the award shows and getting involved in some larger editorial gigs for specific events and things where I would be holed up in a hotel room somewhere in working with tape decks as they were running and shuttling tape decks in. The whole axiom about things are never finished, they're kind of reach a state where you can abandon it and feel reasonably good about it, is definitely something that I've learned. I think the biggest takeaway is just the connections that you make. I think it's very important that you pick and choose who you want to work with, because new jobs tend to come from those relationships. And now I see that on a regular basis with some of the filmmakers that I work with, where the same directors and the same editors and assistant editors continue to work from project to project as their careers evolve. So if you develop really good, long-standing relationships with people, it takes care of it. It takes care of you over the course of your career.
And introductions beget introductions, which beget new jobs. It's always fun that way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So 2 decades ago, you started your work at Adobe, talking about their production tools. And that was at a time when Final Cut Pro and Media Composer were the dominant players in the space. What appealed to you about Adobe's vision for the future of editorial?
Well, at the time when I joined Adobe, it was kind of an interesting place in the market. Definitely what was called the Creative Suite at that point had a place in most people's production worlds. People were still dedicated to using Photoshop, After Effects, and some of the other tools. And initially, Premiere went through a lot of revisions and changes. There was a point where the older Premiere code base was actually gently retired and a new from scratch code base was built up, which was where it got the Pro in the name, where Premiere Pro 1.0 and 1.5 came out. And it was a rebuilding. It was actually PC only for a number of years because, at that time, Apple was also undergoing a major transition between the older System 7 type of architecture to, the modern OS 10. And, so there was, it was kind of an interesting transition for, I think, a lot of different parts of the industry at that point. And while Premiere had some really interesting underpinnings, particularly its file-based workflows, it's still, when I joined the company, it was just as CS3 was coming out and they were just getting back to the Mac platform. And it had so much potential at that point. But I remember when Premiere didn't have, you had to go into a dedicated monitor for trimming because you couldn't just simply, select multiple trim points in the timeline. That actually didn't even show up until CS6. So what I was hoping to bring to the table at that point was, being able to kind of work with customers and kind of understand editorial workflows and start to bring some of that to the engineering teams and start to help in, just making the core functionality that was actually pretty strong, putting the niceties on it to actually make it functional on a day-to-day basis. And we quickly saw early wins in the news and sports type of areas. Being able to work natively with file-based workflows was something that Premiere had a big advantage of, and editing in place as well. Premiere really focused on that whole idea of just when you're importing, you're really just linking to the clips wherever they happen to live. And, that was a huge change from people that were used to like nearline storage, online storage, and having to wait for stuff to actually ingest before you could start to edit. And so in the fast turnaround world, that was where a lot of our early success was. Trailer houses began to follow after that just because of like the way audio works in Premiere. We've just continued to see the evolution of Premiere Since I've been in Los Angeles, when I moved from, I was living in Asia. I tend to gloss over it, but from 2011 to 2016, I was based over in Singapore, focused on growing the business over in Asia. But when I came to Hollywood, like the very first thing they did was put me on a upcoming feature film. This was just after the work done on the first Deadpool movie, and engineering had a lot of interesting ideas of how they could improve Premiere for long form. And that began on this film called Only the Brave and continued all the way up until 2020 when we released productions. So I was a big part of that, kind of getting that workflow of collaborative on-premise workflows really dialed into Premiere.
So, since there's been a lot of buzz around the updates announced at NAB 26, let's get into the big one, color mode. I'm assuming you were deep in the weeds for this with your adventures into color. But first of all, it was very close to the vest project. Not a lot of people knew about it. How was it working on something when you couldn't share this with most people? And did you think it was going to have the impact that it has had?
I don't think we've seen the full effect of the impact until it comes out of beta and people really, really get a chance to play with it. Really quick, I don't want to take any credit for this. There's a fantastic team that's led by a gentleman most people know in the industry, Alexis van Hurkman. This is his brainchild, and he's got a fantastic team of engineers, UI designers that are all backing that up. Everybody on the team has contributed in amazing ways, but basically this all started, Alexis came to work for Adobe kind of in a roundabout fashion. He was working at Frame.io at the time. And when a lot of the color engineers realized we had Alexis working for him, if you don't know who Alexis is, look up his book. It's probably sitting on your shelf if you've taken a stab at learning color grading and correction. But a very well known person in the industry when it comes to working with digital color. And the team actually sat him down and said, we would love to get your thoughts on color in Premiere. And his reaction was more guarded, saying, I have some really interesting ideas, but this is going to be a long-term effort. We're talking 3 to 5 years to bring this to fruition. And generally, big software companies want the next big thing coming out in 6 to 9 months. And surprisingly, everybody looked at what he wanted to do and said, do it, make it happen. And so this has been a multi-year effort, and it's started with version 25 of Premiere, revamping the color pipeline in Premiere to take better advantage of log and raw media. And understanding color management can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. You tend to work with footage that doesn't look good directly out of the camera because it's recorded in log. It has that flat, washed out look if you try and view it. You have to put a transform on it to make it look good. Then when it comes to doing the math, you do the math in a higher color space than you can actually see on a monitor. I just took delivery of a new monitor. I'm super excited because it has 99% of P3. And we're already talking about stuff beyond P3 with 2020 and everything else. So it's, and then from there, you have to put kind of a set of glasses on at the end to say, okay, now show me what the results are going to look like in 709. So all those steps inside are invisible to the average editor. And understanding them is something that, can be a complex thing to kind of understand what the heck is going on. And part of the first goal of this was just trying to make that color management a bit seamless. Now, the interesting thing is up until now, we've left it off by default. So one of the first things I always tell people is go into your preferences, turn on display color management, and then turn on your project settings for automatically detecting log and raw media, and your LUT workflows will just magically go away. Premiere will do the right thing. So that's been a big part of it, is kind of just making sure people understand what is going on under the hood with Premiere. And I've spent a lot of time kind of focused on that. One of my superpowers, if I were to give myself a superpower, is I tend to come up with some good ways of taking complex topics and not simplifying them so that they're wrong, but kind of breaking them down in a way I think a lot of people can understand them. And I've really tried to do that when it comes to some of the color and the underlying color management side of what Premiere is doing now.
From what I recall from HPA, a couple of the roundtables, they were talking about ways to begin working in wider color gamut much earlier in the editorial process, and that begats discussions about the kind of monitor like you just got. And it sounds like this is just simply going to be an easy button. Oh, hey, it'll detect it. It'll put the right LUT on, tell it your monitor, and you're ready to rock and roll. You don't have to worry about someone baking in color to every different kind of camera you've got in your system.
That's the eventual goal. Yeah, I mean, at this point, it still is important to understand where the different switches are, and in those off cases where Premiere's not recognizing what goes on. As you're probably very aware, metadata is fragile. It can be one of those things where the tags that say, "Hey, this was recorded on a Sony using S-Log3," can go away if somebody is going through and transcoding and converting footage. And so knowing where those settings are so that you can go, wait a minute, we lost the tags on this. Let me select all of these and say, yep, this is S-Log3. Oh, look, Premiere's doing the right thing now. I think it's still important to understand the underpinnings of it. But yeah, easy button is the goal. And if you're taking footage direct from camera into Premiere, generally speaking, most formats are automatically detected, and the right optical transform is being done to make the footage look correct.
That'll also begin to get camera manufacturers to get that information metadata out to the tool sets like Premiere much earlier, so that when that footage begins to flow out of production, it's just there. It's the perfect gap filler for this workflow.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, the two things that I hear from editors: number one, no editor wants to necessarily look at log footage. They don't want to have to explain it to their clients that are sitting in the edit bay with them. That inevitable, is it going to look like that? Kind of feeling. And second off, they don't want to have to get in and try and figure out, like, dealing with LUTs or dealing with other stuff. And if you have color management on in Premiere, generally speaking, it just works. There's some gaps around the edges at this point that the team is working on. There's always a new format, that we need to talk about supporting. But the vast majority of cameras, whether you're talking about Sony, Panasonic, Canon, DJI, Apple ProRes Log, we pretty much support the majority of the formats out there, with a few exceptions.
So are we able to take a look at the new mode now?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And so with this, the new color mode, the basic idea of this to start with, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on just a little utility here so that you should be able to see a red circle around my cursor there that I can hopefully zoom in and out on. There we go. Okay. To get started inside of color mode, this is a full-on mode inside of Premiere. So for most folks, being in the edit mode and working in the standard editing mode, here's the same sequence here. And this is a sequence I was showing at NAB, but the basic idea of this is it's kind of this cut back and forth between a very nervous guy staring at a telephone wanting to call this lady. The lady is going through just kind of living her best life, and there's indoor sequences, there's outdoor sequences or outdoor scenes. There are these radical different colors, with the kitchen being more yellow, the bedroom being more teal, and using adjustment layers in the old way of working in Premiere would not be helpful with this. There would be a lot of constant copy and paste with no association between anything. Color mode really takes this and it breaks it down in a couple of different really interesting areas. The first thing is this is a representation of the sequence that you see over here. This is called the clip grid. And with the clip grid, not only do I see each of the individual shots, and I could go through here, and you can see as I'm scrubbing through this, it's highlighting the particular clip that I'm playing. but this allows me to reorder my sequence in a way that makes sense for color grading. With color grading, I'm more concerned with getting groups together of the various scenes that are all shot in the same location. So even though my edit, I go back and forth between the kitchen and the bedroom, by using a filter here, I can quickly get all of the bedroom interior scenes, the exterior scenes, all the kitchen scenes, all kind of aligned very quickly. And color mode lets me go in and create overlapping groups if I want to, so that I can basically do a grade as quickly as possible, focused on grading the same scenes all at the same time. So if I wanted to work on all of the wide shots here, I could just quickly create a group, call this interior wide bed, and now I'm up and working with all of the clips for that bedroom scene, wherever they happen to exist in my edit. So these groups can actually, you can actually have clips that are members of more than one group. So that's one way that you can actually share your grades. The controls themselves are designed around this architecture that actually helps to teach you what you're actively doing. So you'll notice when I click on any of the controls, there are these little pop-up scopes. We call this the heads-up display, or the HUD. And the idea is there are little blue arrows and controls in there that are actually teaching me what I'm doing. So if I go in, and let me just make these a bit bigger here so that we can see these. I'm actually going to anchor them to the program monitor here, just so you can really see that for a moment here. But for example, if I click on temperature and start to move my mouse up and down, you can see little tiny blue, if you look for a blue arrow in the very center of the scope, it's actually showing me what I'm doing. And these are all they're two-dimensional controls. Up and down is actually making things warmer or cooler. Left and right is adjusting the hue. Similarly, if I go into exposure, up and down is changing the exposure. Left and right is actually changing the black level. So I can bring the black level down to where I want it. So these controls are all designed to be fairly intuitive, but particularly if I'm going through and using something like, I'll go ahead and reset my temperature here. If I wanted to just change the hue of this teal and make it more blue, clicking on the hue shift, left and right is kind of widening or narrowing the range that I'm affecting. But then left and right, or up and down, you can see it's actually moving the color around the wheel so that I can actually kind of push this more into the blues here. And then I can see, I like doing subtle things. If you need me to do something more garish, I will. But I really like the fact that these controls allow for a really subtle adjustment. I just want to make sure it's coming through in our show today. Because I do tend to make these kind of nice little subtle adjustments, but we're going from kind of a teal there to more of a royal blue of the bedspread and everything in the walls in this adjustment. So I've just basically used a single operation here for doing this adjustment of the wide shots. I'll do one more adjustment here. Let me just take the contrast control. I'll just change the pivot point. Actually, let me go the other direction. We'll change the pivot point here because I want to actually affect the blacks a little bit more than I'm affecting the highlights. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. And once again, I can kind of turn that on and off. And you'll notice it's affecting all of the icons over on the side there when I'm turning that on and off. If I want this to be the baseline for the medium shots, we can very, very quickly create a new group by starting with, if I want this operation here, I can just copy that single operation, multiple operations, everything on the clip, and create a new group by selecting the medium shots and hitting paste and replace. And so now we have the wide shots and the medium shots matched. For the medium shot, I've made a separate group here. And again, I might change the name of this. Instead of interior wide, we'll change that to interior medium. And from here, I might want to add, maybe just change the texture control just a little tiny bit. We'll just soften the medium shot just a little bit there. That looks good. And then from here, I could start moving forward. So you kind of get the idea of how the base level adjustments work. I could go on for an hour if you let me, talking about like different zones that we can select based on luminance values. There's very easy ways of separating things out into multiple zones for shadows and highlights so that we can affect them differently. We can use samples to figure those out or analyze the zone thresholds so that it'll kind of balance the zone thresholds as we want to work with them. And there's also this whole concept of working with the entire sequence and creating things that are known as styles. So this is where we get into the specialty modules, and there's a lot of power in this, where I could actually take something like a contrast kit module and a film color module and come up with kind of an overall look for the project based on these controls. So film color is a specialty module that deals with negative and print emulation. And then contrast kit has special controls, that start to deal with curves and midpoints for curves. There's even modules in here for things like flare. And we can basically, start on a sequence level, come up with an overall look, then move to the scene level to make any adjustments from there. And then you always have base level clip adjustments that you can make in addition. So the interface is specifically designed to look simple and inviting, but the deeper you start to get into it with these different additional modules on top of the base level controls, there's so much power in here. And this idea of stacking operations and creating these different groups, I really think it's found a nice balance between the simplicity of working on a timeline linearly and the complexity of nodes. It's kind of that middle ground where it gives you the power that you need, but without the complexity of learning all the different bits and pieces of connecting the bricks, as it were.
It sounds like also what's happening here is there's been some folks who've said, oh, it's just too simple, colorists have a certain way of working. It sounds like what really has happened is they haven't actually gotten their hands on it. They don't know where the power actually lies underneath.
There's actually, I've been following some of the recent posts on Reddit, and there was actually somebody over the weekend that said exactly that. They were incredibly negative when they first watched the videos. And part of this is there's a principle in design that's called the delight of discovery. And the team has really leaned into that. If you look at a screenshot of what I'm showing right now, you might see sequence operations and clip operations and say, well, there's no grouping. There's no way I can do a group. You don't discover the groups until you actually select a series of clips, and then the selection comes up and appears here. And then you can create a group that kind of lives in between the two. And, when you start to look at some of the different types of grades, this is a great example. Let's see, this sequence here, if I switch over to color mode here, you can see where, there are multiple adjustments. Kind of everything is sort of broken out into these different adjustments across this scene. And if I start to play this, you'll see as we jump from clip to clip, you can see, the sequence adjustments stay the same, but when we need to, we jump into daytime groups, dusk, darker, different types of groups that are happening. And this area down here shows that there's multiple operations all happening as part of this grade. The other thing I didn't show is that if you suddenly you've created something as part of a group and you say, I want to use that on the entire sequence, drag and drop is your friend. You can actually drag any operation from one area to another, or bring it back down and say, I only want to do this on one shot, drag it to the clip area. So it's very easy to kind of set up and get the grade that you want, and you can use all the controls in one operation, or you could break it apart and just use exposure in one, temperature in another, so that you have that ability, that flexibility to kind of move them around if you need to.
And also, because it's going to be going through Premiere, through editorial, finishing, and then into possibly a grading room, different people will use different tool sets throughout, but you're building upon what they've done. A lot of times in video and in audio, we get to finish. Oh, everything that the offline folks did, we're gonna throw that away.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily do that anymore. You can build upon the whole process as it is worked out, just like the story narrative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, that's been kind of, in the last 10 years, I've heard that more often than anything else, is this whole idea of editors wanting to get closer to what finished is going to look like in editorial, so that the final impact of the story, color is a big part of telling the story, audio is a big part of telling the story. And when I see editors like Billy Fox cutting in 5.1, wanting to make sure that using some of the older tools on past films like Lumetri, to get the color somewhat dialed in on some of the dailies that didn't quite match. It's that idea of getting as close as possible to the finish line in editorial, even if you're going to do that turnaround and you're going to basically use that for creative intent, but start over from scratch.
You mentioned Lumetri. How will folks work with a project that's we've just begun, and I'm using Lumetri now because I'm not using the beta version. And then when this comes out of beta, gets into general availability, how will those things come forward, and how can you mix and match in a single sequence between the two types of effects?
It's a great question. So our approach to Lumetri, the Lumetri engine has been a fantastic tool in Premiere. A lot of the sliders and things were designed with safety in mind. There's actually like some guardrails on things like the saturation slider that drive professional colorists nuts. I mean, that was one of the things about it was, if you would pull saturation too high, it bends slightly into the yellows, because too much red breaks legal values and you run into problems with 709 video. So, there was a lot of intelligence built into Lumetri, but the math behind it and everything else, in this day and age where we're really focused on like log, raw workflows, delivering to 709 SDR and also PQ, HDR, HLG, we're gently retiring the panel. So moving forward, we are going to keep, as long as we feel we need to, we're going to keep the Lumetri effect in Premiere for backwards compatibility. We're not planning on recommending sort of a mix and match approach. The mathematics and the color science between Lumetri and the new color mode are different. They are, the controls work in, if you use Lumetri and you try and stack the color mode on top of it, you can get some unwanted results from that. And so if you're working in Lumetri today, I would say continue to use it for the time being until you're ready to test out the beta. When we ship this, we will be taking the what's called the Lumetri panel in Premiere out, but Lumetri will still appear in the effect controls as a color effect in here. You'll still be able to go in and open it and actually make some changes to it. One last thing about color mode I did want to call out, because we realize there's always time where you don't want to necessarily dive into color mode. You just want to make kind of a quick and easy adjustment while you're in this edit mode. And a lot of folks use Lumetri for that. The properties panel in Premiere in the edit mode actually does have access to these color sliders. These are basically doing a single clip grade using those base level adjustments in a more, what I would call a traditional fashion for Premiere, with these simple sliders. So if you just need to go in and make an exposure adjustment, or you just want to warm up or cool down a shot, you can actually do that without having to jump over into color mode. So this is going to kind of be sort of a bridge, I think, for a lot of folks that are used to Lumetri, that want to start to learn color mode. If I make this adjustment here and jump over into color mode, this clip will have that temperature adjustment will be in the base level adjustments on the clip level.
Any idea of when you're going to go, when it's going to ship?
When it's ready, um,
Perfect.
it'll ship when it's ready. The one caveat that I would give to someone right now, and one of the reasons why this is still in beta, is color mode and the color effect that we're using under the hood for this, the new color science, is it's not something that After Effects currently understands. So the beta version of After Effects won't understand what this color effect is. So the team, now that the core of what we wanted to bring to beta for color mode is done. I mean, that's one area the team will need to focus on before we do a final ship. It's just a simple fact of life that many Premiere editors touch After Effects in some way, and we want to make sure that they have a viable workflow for that.
So if you're going to try out the beta version on a project, definitely check to make sure that all parts of your workflow are going to be cool with that, and you're not going to accidentally break something down the line. I always hate it when that happens.
Definitely. That's and that's the reason we're keeping it in beta. The team's got a lot of stuff that they're thinking about. One thing I want to point out with this is, any type of assistive AI for color is not in this. This is designed to be kind of a complete rewrite and a complete baseline package that allows for somebody to move controls and make these types of adjustments. Where we want to focus in the future, obviously Adobe's been very big on assistive AI, and this gives sort of the nice foundation that follows our guidelines, that even though we want assistive AI to help editors do their job, we never want to replace it. We always want to have that ability for somebody to make the final decisions on those types of controls. So this gives the assistive AI team kind of that nice foundation to figure out what we want to do when we move forward in that space.
Moving along out of color mode, Open Timeline I/O is something I remember first seeing shown at the HPA Tech Retreat a number of years ago. I think Morgan did the demo on that one. Can we dive into what improvements that have dropped into that workflow over the last few years, and what newer partners have joined the OTIO initiative?
Well, that's a really good one. OTIO is now inside of Adobe Premiere. It is in the shipping 26.2 release. And we are starting to see workflows that are taking advantage of it. I've already seen the guys at Intelligent Assistants are now doing plugins rather than focusing on Apple XML. They're starting to adapt and work with Open Timeline IO. Open Timeline IO is such an interesting initiative because in the past we've had to rely on these sort of black box interchange formats that, generally speaking, are not super well documented. I think Apple XML did a pretty good job with a lot of the white papers. We're still finding dark data in there that, that's how they want you to do it to get it translated. And then you're up to how it's implemented from application to application. OTIO really opens up the workflow, and it does what is documented, and it creates modules to make sure that you have proper compatibility between moving from app to app. And I've even started to see some workflows with people taking stuff out of Nuke, actually using OTIO as a way of getting stuff over into Adobe Premiere. It's an interesting thing how OTIO really provides a well-documented platform for explaining a timeline, and it's very clear what it does do and what it doesn't do. So when it comes to getting your edit out of Premiere or getting an edit from another platform over into Premiere, It's proving to be a really nice tool. Now there's still some rough edges around the edges. The biggest challenge I still see in the industry has to do with time ramps. When you're moving from slow motion to fast motion and back again, the mathematics between every application, whether you're talking Media Composer, Final Cut, Resolve, or Premiere, they all handle those ramps with slightly different mathematics. So getting consistency with that, OTIO doesn't yet address, but I'm hoping that that might be something they add to it in the near future.
The other thing I'm hoping is that plugin manufacturers will begin to license for all apps on one computer, not for a single app on that computer, and then you've got to buy it again because you're using a different app on the same computer.
We've definitely seen and heard that from multiple customers in the past, and we've thought long and hard about it, and we've even come up with some ideas around, a marketplace where maybe Adobe could handle the licensing. I haven't seen anything come to fruition with any of those discussions over the years, but it's definitely a pain point that I've seen moving forward. One other thing I just wanted to mention is UXP. Premiere and all the Adobe apps have been, you've been able to make panels inside of Premiere for many years now. But the framework that they were built on is an older framework, and a lot of developers were saying it was kind of outdated. They wanted to see something new. Premiere actually now has supports a framework called UXP. There is actually, for somebody who's interested in working on this, if you go to the Creative Cloud, desktop applications, go to apps, all apps, and scroll all the way down at the bottom, you'll find something here called UXP Developer Tools that you can download. And this will let you write panels. If you're not a developer, kind of an interesting side note of what I've been doing as of late, I actually vibe coded my first panel the other day using Claude. So this was basically this idea of going into Claude, giving it sort of a description of what I wanted a Premiere panel to do using UXP. And after about 25, 30 iterations, I got a working panel that will check a sequence for any offline clips and notify me if there's no offline clips. Yeah, I was very surprised. The last time I coded something, there were Go subroutines and line numbers involved in the screensaver I was making for a Commodore 64. So it's been a while. So it was a surprisingly intuitive experience with no other tools necessary than just the large language model I was using, UXP developer tools, and a copy of Premiere running.
One other thing with OTIO, Media Reconnect has its own new search capabilities that makes the whole pair a powerhouse and interop. What are those new search capabilities that are available in Reconnect?
So the interface has been modified and changed somewhat to kind of just unify how we look for certain things, and the search functionality has greatly improved. The other thing that came out in 26.2 is the team looked long and hard at the logic around relinking, and they put some more automatic looking for where media lives. It's funny when you start to talk about editors. Everybody edits a little bit differently, but a lot of folks use a very similar organizational structure that, their projects are in a folder next to a project or a folder called media. And Premiere is now more aware of how that works, and it knows how to dive in there, and it actually knows how to kind of automatically relink a little bit better. I've had some really pleasant experiences where in a Finder window, I decided to go through and reorganize a lot of stuff without realizing I had a project open. And I jumped back into Premiere. I saw a bunch of stuff go red and then relink automatically. Whereas in the past, it would always bring up that media offline dialog box and have me at least do a first level search for it. So there's a lot of improvement in there as far as like improving how relinking works inside of Premiere. The team took a full production cycle to kind of focus on that. So for anybody out there who's always saying all Adobe's doing is generative AI stuff, we're still going back to the basics and looking for ways that we can improve on even the simplest features inside of Premiere.
Thing for me, having lived in the archive space for a while now, it allows you to go in, restructure your storage to make it clean for archive, and then when you light up Premiere, it's just going to blip. Oh, there it is. It's found it. It doesn't care that you've moved everything around, which is pretty damn cool in my book.
Yeah, it's a huge improvement over what it was before. I think on the books, I think there were at least 30 or 40 different improvements that all kind of came together. These were smaller things that we had on the list to tackle, and the team just basically went through line item and not only fixed them all, but then added this new functionality that didn't exist before.
So, Frame.io's Drive, it's the first small step into the sort of storage area workflows for Adobe. What's been the response from the industry so far with it?
So far, people are pretty excited about this idea of being able to mount a frame project and see it show up on an operating system level. This was something that I used to deal with a lot of customers that would just make an assumption somehow Frame did that by default. And always thought it was interesting. We definitely took all that feedback back to the Frame team, and they've been hard at work on this for a while. It's still early days. The licensing for it is kind of set up in such a way that it's more geared towards an enterprise user of Frame at this point. So it's not something that is going to be an answer for everybody. But it's a beautiful thing to just be able to, you've put everything up into a Frame project. You simply launch the new Frame Drive desktop client, find your Frame project, and click Mount. And at that point, on a Mac, it shows up in Finder. On a Windows machine, it shows up in an Explorer window. And it mounts just like an SMB drive at that point. So it's kind of a cloud network drive that gives me the ability to copy stuff to it. You can even open Premiere projects that live inside a Frame and be able to actually edit this project while it's living in Frame. One thing we're kind of gearing people towards right now, this first iteration, the team is hard at work with the team that handles productions in Premiere. So at this point, I would give kind of a little bit of a warning about not using it with productions just yet. We recognize that people doing long form work want to have productions living in the cloud, and putting them on Frame Drive seems like a perfect solution. We're not quite there yet with the speed in which the locks kind of propagate. And so we just want to give people a little bit of a caveat that for right now, as we're recording this, I don't want to recommend folks that are doing long form to think about Frame Drive as a solution for putting their production in the cloud. We do have other partners that work fantastic for that today that are very well known. But right now there's just a little bit too much latency for our team to give it the green light.
You mentioned a little bit about AI, so let's talk about AI. Firefly and generative AI have been drawing the attention, kind of like fajitas coming to the table at a Mexican restaurant, just big steam everywhere. It's not the be all and end all for the AI story in the product line. Media intelligence does bring a lot to the table, and without needing to leave the device you're working on for the most part, a good part of that lives inside of Media Encoder now as well. How is this all working with the Sidecar PMRI workflow? How does it play with other parts of the ecosystem? And how does it play with third-party MAMs? A lot of those tool sets are beginning to overlap. Some things you can do inside of Premiere, other things are going to need a little bit more firepower, I think.
Yeah, so the basic idea of the way media intelligence works is Premiere will go through, as you're importing your clips into Premiere, we typically start to run a scan or an analysis of those clips. And that information can be contained in a sidecar file, something called a PRMI file, like you mentioned. Premiere Media Index, I think is what that stands for. It's pretty fast. Usually on my older M1 Macs, I was seeing about maybe 6 to 8 minutes to scan through an hour worth of archival footage. And once you have this media intelligence file, it's a visual index, meaning I can search on red car moving from left to right in an hour-long piece, and it'll mark an in and out range of the 20 seconds of the red car moving from left to right. So it's pretty powerful. We did just introduce the concept of media intelligence watch folders inside of Adobe Media Encoder. And these are actually designed not only to handle the media index, but it also places the transcription in that media index as well. So in the past, if you wanted to transcribe a bunch of stuff, you had to bring it into a Premiere project for that transcription to actually happen. We can now store that as part of the sidecar. So it's a big improvement there. I've had a number of people basically say they're going to set up, some smaller system in the rack, and basically you set up in a copy of Media Encoder, you set a watch folder location as an analysis watch folder, and rather than copying clips to a different place or transcoding clips, which is the way watch folders have worked for a long time in Media Encoder, now what it's just doing is doing that analysis pass and putting those PRMI files in place. So any editor imports those pieces of media, they're getting the analysis done for them ahead of time. As far as third parties are concerned, that is an area that we have heard a lot from various people. I don't have anything to announce just yet, but a lot of folks are curious about this. There's a number of tools out there with asset management about not having to reinvent the wheel. And right now, the way we store data in the PRMI file and everything is proprietary, but we'll see where the future leads on that. I wish I had a firm answer to share with you today on that one, but it is an interesting question. We've heard it from our customers loud and clear, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens there.
Awesome. So, speaking of AI and all the technological advantages, I know you had a jam-packed schedule showing the color mode page at NAB. I think I actually saw you in 3 halls and at the same time. Were there things you saw on the show floor that you either wished you'd had time to stop and take a look at, or you did get a chance to stop and see? And what were some of those things from those little booths on the fringe?
Well, I mean, on a personal level, I actually found a group of guys in the central hall doing astrophotography related equipment. I did get a chance to actually sit and talk with them briefly. There's so much going on right now, and a show like NAB is always, so jam packed with so many different things going on. I spent the majority of my time kind of going back and forth between the central hall and the North Hall. It took me a second there. We've said South Hall for so many years, and the South Hall was not involved this year. It was
Hard to get it out. Yeah.
West, North, and Central. I'm still pretty excited about some of the cost of displays coming down. I have sitting in a box behind me right now a new Asus monitor that I'm going to be setting up here in a little bit, that does 1,000 nits, and it's really a beautiful display. We got a chance to use some of them at the Creator Lab this year. There's so much that went on at the show. I wish I had more time to dig into some of the new camera announcements. Seeing a GoPro with a Micro Four Thirds telephoto lens on it was just like, what? Where are we going now? I wish there was something there was so much that I saw in passing that you just never get a chance to kind of dive too deeply into all the different things that are out there.
Yep, that's the wonders of the show. And if you did wander off to the South Hall, that was WrestleMania this year. There was a WrestleMania store over there, so I couldn't blame folks if they're into that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
So, Karl, last question, and I'm going to start asking every guest this: if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice at a pivotal point in your career, when would that be, and what would that be?
Wow. Well, the first one that comes to mind is 2003, and don't sell the Apple stock would be the first one that comes to mind. That's something that I do go back and look at. I think the biggest thing, kind of just to bring this back to what we talked about at the beginning, is, make a conscious effort to work with the people that you want to work with, because you are even in your 20s, at the very beginning of your career, the people that you work with, you build those relationships over time, and you want to be working with the people that you really enjoy their time and you enjoy and have a good working collaborative relationship with. And I would love to have
Makes
heard
sense.
that advice early on in my career.
Yep. No one gets to the end and says from their deathbed, I wish I spent more time at work doing overtime. It just doesn't happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So to our audience, thanks for dropping by with us here today on the script. If you found value in this conversation, please hit those like and subscribe buttons down there. It genuinely helps us get great guests like Karl in front of the right people. Special thanks to Karl Soule for joining us, and to the team at Adobe that's constantly working to improve all of our creative tools. So if you got a workflow that's ailing you, tools, storage, live production, doctor's in. Drop me a line at contact@thepostdoctor.com and find everything that we do at thepostdoctor.com. I'm really grateful to see everybody today, and we will see you the next time on the script.